Are you someone that thrifts too many clothes in the wrong size because you think, well, I'll learn how to fix it at some point, someday, but you also don't know how to sew or use a sewing machine? The basics you'll need are some thread in a color that is preferably close to your fabric, some needles of different sizes, something that you can use to help insert the thread into the needle, which I don't use because mine is broken, but it would be useful to other people, something to cut your thread. You'll also need some pins and a seam ripper if necessary. I will be using that a little bit today. And then of course something to put your pins in, as well as a companion for emotional support. I'm also going to be using elastic in this, or at least attempting to use elastic. So essentially the plan for this top is I'm just going to take in the sides just of this bodice part so that the actual bottom that wraps around underneath the breast part actually fits in a little bit better, and it'll be a little bit more flattering, I think. And then for the pants, what we're going to do is just install just a little bit of elastic just around the back, just to bring in the sides a little bit, make it a little bit more fitted at the top without it really ruining the actual size of it, so that if I gain a couple sizes or something later on, I can always remove the elastic, or it'll stretch to fit a bigger size too. So I hope it should be pretty clear that I am by no means an expert, and so any experts that find this are more than welcome to leave some tips and the tricks in the comments. However, for starters, I just put on the garment and then I'm just pinning where I think it needs to be taken in and kind of marking how much fabric I'm going to have to either remove if you're going to cut the garment, or just placing basically where I want to put my elastic insert. For the top, I'm doing the same thing, and I will say that I think it is pretty helpful to put on the garment inside out so you can actually see where the seam lines are, and you can kind of use that to help you mark out where to take in things. If you kind of follow your seam lines, it's a little bit easier to figure out where you could, take in some fabric or put in a dart or do any kind of alterations that you're looking for. So right here, I'm just measuring basically how long of a piece of elastic I'm going to need, and the whole point of elastic is you want it to be shorter than your actual length, as long as it will stretch to the length that you need, so that if, this is a little bit more versatile if you don't want to just like cut off all that fabric, if you want to leave some fabric there to potentially make it bigger again, then I think this is a good method. So I measured it out based on how much it would stretch. Initially I thought I was going to use 2 pieces of elastic just because I didn't have a thicker piece and thought that maybe a thicker piece would be better for a waistband, but I didn't really need it. So I'm just pinning one side of the elastic to where I am basically going to sew it down so that it doesn't move in the pants and I'll actually contract all of that fabric. And then I used a mix of my seam ripper as well as some scissors to cut open just the front fabric. Since this waistband is folded over, there's 2 essentially pieces of fabric there. So you just want to cut open the inside fabric. You don't want to cut open the outside because then it'll be noticeable and it'll be harder to close up from the outside. So just that inside piece of the fabric, I'm just cutting that open to basically make a channel that I can then insert my elastic into. Using the safety pin method, I am just putting the elastic inside of this channel now and marking out basically where I need to sew it down. To sew down this elastic, I am using a back stitch, which is one of the strongest hand stitches that you can use. Basically, it's really strong. Essentially, you just put the needle in, and instead of just going in front to put your next stitch, you're gonna go back behind the stitch that you just did and then go forward when you basically go out the other side of. Also, as I'm sewing this, I'm sewing both layers of the fabric with the elastic in between. I also went ahead and did a straight stitch across the piece of elastic through all 3 pieces of fabric, and this is also to ensure that the outside fabric isn't bunching in a weird way. If you notice garments that have elastic in them, they will do a stitch across, and that's to keep everything sort of locked in place. Once all of our elastic is inside and locked down, we can go ahead and start to stitch up our little opening in that first layer of fabric that we did. So I am just using, I don't actually know if this stitch is, I don't think this is a whip stitch, but basically just sewing it together, I guess. I'm just kind of folding it over since it was a little bit bunched, but I'm just connecting the 2 pieces of fabric and then just sewing it together. I don't know what this stitch is called, but nothing too fancy. Just going right across and then bringing my thread back over from that first side that I went through and just going over like that. Yeah, and then doing that on both sides so that we can close it up and look like we were never even in there. And after trying it on, I liked the fit and decided to move on to my shirt. Now for the top, I'm going to show off a little bit more, some more stitches that I think are very useful for hand sewing and just doing this very basic tailoring. So where I marked off here is not along the actual seam line, considering on this top the seams are honestly pretty uneven on either side, so sometimes that is going to happen. And I basically created sort of a dart shape because I want where it meets the top part to still open up and still be wide enough for like where my breasts are. So since we're just taking in the waistband essentially on this shirt, I created sort of a dart, which is like that triangle of fabric. And now I'm just using a back stitch as well to ensure that this is going to stay nice and together, that's not going to come apart at all, especially because this is going to be a little bit tighter, but we're going to rely on most of that give to come from the elastic that is in the back of the shirt already. So to make sure that that's not going to come undone, we're just going to use a back stitch again. After doing that on both sides, you could in theory just cut off all of that bulk fabric. However, I'm not going to do that so that I can make sure that if I need to, I can always open up that seam and have all of that extra fabric. But until that happens, I don't want it getting in the way or just feeling uncomfortable and bulky. So we're going to sew it down by using a whip stitch. So in a whip stitch, you are going through that first layer of fabric and you're just picking up a tiny little stitch so that it doesn't show on the other side. You're just picking up a little stitch to basically sew it down flat, but not in a way that leaves any visible seams on the outside of the garment, which on this piece, luckily where I'm sewing right now is actually 2 layers of fabric, so I'm just going through that first layer and not breaching the outside layer. But when we get closer to where it actually meets the top of the blouse, it turns into 1 layer. So I would say if you're working with just 1 layer of fabric, be really mindful and careful that you don't see any of that thread on the outside. So after trying it on, I liked how tight the bottom was, but I still felt that the top was a little bit wonky. So I decided to gather where the cups actually are a little bit more. So for this, I'm just doing a straight stitch. So in the same way that we did the back stitch, instead of going back when you put a new stitch, you are just going in front of the stitch that you just put through. And so for gathering, you also kind of want it to be pretty spaced out. You want a lot more space in between your stitches versus something like that. And for this, I'm just showing it in the yellow thread, so it's a little bit easier to see. I did go back over with the same blue thread, so it wasn't as noticeable, but depending on where you're putting it, I would also put it closer to where that other seam line is, so that it's a little bit more hidden, since you can see this on both sides of your fabric. And of course, I definitely recommend as you're going to, after you do one side, or after you do take in anything or gather anything or put in any elastic, to try it on right after doing it to see if, you know, if it's as tight as you want it, if it needs to be a little bit looser, if it needs to be more gathered. Definitely try it on as you are working on it, so that you can make sure that, you know, you're not doing stuff that you're just going to take out later, or that it's actually fitting in a way that you want it to. And then you can also adjust as necessary if there's anything else that needs to be adjusted. On this top, I also closed in the top button a little bit, just because it was sitting a little bit weird on the opening, and I just wanted that to be a little bit more fitted too, but I didn't record that. And here is what everything ended up looking. So overall, I really liked how everything turned out. I think it's a big improvement to what it was before, and I definitely think I will wear both these pieces more often now. I do think I could have taken in the pants a little bit more, so I'll probably go back and fix that elastic in there. But overall, I really like it, and I know this is a pretty quick little video, but I hope you guys learn something too, or at the very least feel more confident in tailoring your own stuff by hand and just giving it a try. You know, there's no harm in trying, and I hope, if anything, that's what you learned from this video. So yeah, if you guys have any tips and tricks, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Let me know how you think I did, and see you in the next one. Bye!